Hi, welcome to Give Me the Bible, where God's Word speaks for itself. I know it's been a long time since I've made a video. I appreciate your patience, but I'm back and I'm ready to get rolling on these videos again. Had a lot of traveling to do, some other projects that had to take precedence over this, but this is important to me. I'm glad that it's important to you, and I'm ready to study God's Word. Remember, we've been talking about the New Testament chronology. How do the 27 books of the Bible fit together? What are the purposes of those books? And more recently, we've talked about Paul the Apostle and his missionary journeys to teach the gospel not only to the Jews, but even to the Gentiles. And last time we talked about the purpose of Romans. And Romans, remember, was written in Acts chapter 20, verses 2 and 3. That basically records that Paul went to Greece for 3 months, and that's where Corinth was, and he wrote Romans from Corinth. Well, the next letters we want to talk about are Paul's prison letters. That is, the letters that he wrote while he was in prison in Rome. But when you read Acts, you find that he doesn't go to prison until Acts chapter 28. So the question is, what happens in this gap between Acts chapter 20, when Paul writes Romans, and Acts 28, when Paul is actually in Rome in prison? How in the world did he end up there in prison? That's what we want to talk about briefly here. First of all, remember that in Romans chapter 15, Paul told the Romans that he planned to come to see them, but first he wanted to go to Jerusalem, because remember, on his third missionary journey, he was collecting funds from the Gentile churches, and he planned to go to Jerusalem and deliver those funds to the needy Christians there. Also remember that Jerusalem was the headquarters for the Jews, and many Jews hated Paul. They could not stand the fact that he was teaching that even Gentiles could be saved, and that salvation was on the basis of faith in Jesus Christ, this guy that the Jews, for the most part, thought was just a fake and a phony and a blasphemer and a criminal that worthy of death on a cross. So by Paul going to Jerusalem, he's essentially going into the heart of the lion's den. And when he gets to Jerusalem, in Acts chapter 21, that's when he actually arrives in Jerusalem, Acts 21, verse 17, the Christians received him gladly, and the Christians gave him a suggestion. They wanted him to participate in a law of Moses ceremony, in a Jewish purification ceremony. And the reason is, they wanted to dispel any false rumors about Paul. There were some false rumors among the Jews that hated him especially, saying that Paul was against the law of Moses, that he was saying that the law of Moses is bad, you shouldn't keep it, and instead we should go with Jesus Christ. But that's not really what Paul taught. Paul taught that salvation was not based on the law of Moses. Salvation was based on the cross of Jesus Christ. He didn't say the law of Moses was bad. In fact, he kept the law of Moses himself, but he didn't keep it as the basis of his salvation. And so he goes through with this Jewish ritual of purification in Acts 21, but there's a problem, because some of the Jews that hate Paul saw him hanging around a Gentile named Trophimus, and they falsely accused Paul of bringing Trophimus, a Gentile, into the temple court area where the Gentiles were not allowed, and that by the Jews was punishable by death. And so they tried to kill Paul, but a Roman soldier rescues Paul out of their hands, keeping him physically safe, while Paul can then give a defense to the Jews. And in Acts chapter 22, Paul gives his defense to the Jews as to why he's preaching what he's preaching, why he changed his life from a murderer to a Christian, and basically that goes well until he says that salvation is for the Gentiles too. When he says that, in Acts 22 and verse 22, it says they listened to him up to that point, but then they raised their voices and said, Acts 22:22, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live. So, essentially, the Jews, from that point, were plotting to kill Paul. And Paul is giving his defense to the Jewish Sanhedrin Council, but that plot to kill him becomes known to the Romans. And so the Romans, once again, because Paul is a Roman citizen, they protect him, they pull him out of there, and they bring him down to Caesarea. And Paul is in prison in Caesarea for 2 full years, giving his defense to different people like the governor Felix and Festus and King Agrippa, until eventually Paul's just kind of fed up and he says, well, I appeal to Caesar. In other words, I want to go to Rome. I want to state my case before the Roman emperor emperor himself. And that is what Acts continues to record for us, is Paul's journey to Rome. And in Acts 28, he actually reaches Rome, and he's in prison there for 2 years, which is where he's going to write his prison letters that we're going to talk about in the next video. But just quickly, I want to make a note about why Acts spends so much time on Paul's defense and his trials. Luke wrote Acts, so why is it that he spends so much time? It seems so uneventful compared to the rest of the book of Acts. Let me suggest that he's doing two things. One, he's defending Paul's character. He's trying to show that Paul really is genuine, that the Lord appeared to him, that he is not trying to harm anyone, he's not trying to trick anybody or fool anybody, he's just trying to preach the salvation of Jesus Christ. And secondly, remember that Acts was written to the most excellent Theophilus. That's Acts chapter 1. You can see that in the introduction. And Theophilus was most likely a Roman official. And so I think what Luke was trying to do is to show that Christianity is not hostile to the Roman government. That's very important. And you see that throughout these trials, that Paul really was on good terms with the Romans. That the Romans kept saying, well, we don't really know why he's being tried. We find no guilt in him. There's really nothing wrong. It's just the Jews who have a problem with him. So Luke's trying to show that Christianity is not against the Roman government and is not trying to be a rebellious movement to try to overthrow the emperor or anything like that. And that's important because once the Roman government can understand that Christianity is not going to take them over or cause problems, then they'll allow it to be taught and allow it to flourish in the empire. I think that's what's going on. I hope that that's clear and helpful. I know that's a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Next video.